of the Health and Medical Research Office at the Australian Department of Health. And in that role, she's got many responsibilities, but one of them is a responsibility for the MRFF program. And Masha, I think we've all been, really impressed by the speed of delivery of the programs and the opportunities over the last little bit. So we're so pleased to have you here today, and would congratulate you on all of the work of your team in making all of this happen. So perhaps over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally, and thank you all for having me here today. I'll just try and load my presentation. Thank you.
We can all see this.
All good? Thank you. So yeah, thank you all for having me, and I'd particularly like to thank Sally and her team for hosting us and for coordinating this meeting today. So I'll speak for about 25 to 30 minutes and then I'll be really happy to take questions. I did get the questions, as Sally indicated, I did get the questions ahead of time, and I have tried to incorporate some of the responses into the presentation today. However, if I've missed anything, please remind me. There were some specific questions around data access, which we've sought input from other parts of the department or other relevant agencies, and I'll provide as much information as I can because I am kind of speaking on behalf of others. And if that's not sufficient by the end of the presentation, I'd be really happy to connect people with relevant people in the department to assist with that. So at a really high level, the Medical Research Future Fund was actually established through legislation in 2015. It's really important to note that the object of the Act is to improve the health and wellbeing of Australians. So kind of every grant activity we do, every activity, every effort that we take is we kind of reference back to the object of the Act and question ourselves about how will this actually improve the health and wellbeing of Australians. So that is a little bit different from what other agencies need to do. However, I try to bring that to the attention of people because it is front and centre of our thinking and our work through the MRFF. So it's a $20 billion endowment fund, as many of you are aware. The final deposit into the fund was made in July 2020, and it was a $3.2 billion deposit. And that means that the fund has achieved full capitalisation. Many of you will be aware that those the funds that have gone into the Medical Research Future Fund were savings from the health system, and the intention was to create a fund that would generate research and feed back into the health system and health outcomes in the longer term. So having an endowment fund is an unusual mechanism for health and medical research or for research more broadly. I haven't found one in any of the discussions that I've had with international colleagues and counterparts. So the fund is actually managed by the Future Fund Board of Governors. So they are responsible for the Future Fund, but also a number of other endowment funds that provide grants. There's one for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander land and sea, and there's one for disaster. We are the only one for health and medical research, or for research more broadly. So the funding provided through the MRFF, it's specified through legislation, is for medical research and medical innovation. And so that constrains the type of activity that we're able to fund. We're also only able to provide grants of financial assistance. We're not able to do procurements or other kind of funding mechanisms. And we're also constrained in the types of organisations that we're able to provide funding to. And they include universities, medical research institutes, corporations, corporate Commonwealth entities, and state and territory governments. In terms of just a little bit more context to try and start teasing out the difference between the MRFF and the NHMRC. The MRFF is really about addressing priority areas, including areas of unmet medical need, with a focus on research, translation and commercialisation. The NHMRC, as you're all very well aware, is all about investigator-led research, and that's about building capacity and enhancing health and medical knowledge more broadly. I like to remind people that we are just part of the broader funding system for health and medical research, and there's a range of other mechanisms that are outlined on that slide that provide support for the sector. we've had really rapid growth in the MRFF. We were only 5 years old, and so just to remind people that our first disbursements were in 2016-17, and that in that year we had $61 million to allocate, and quite rapidly grown. So this year we'll be dispersing just under $600 million, and we'll be peaking in terms of disbursements at $650 million per annum from 22-23 financial year. I guess I like to remind people of that. So the context that we're operating in is that we've really had to lay the foundations for establishing really a complex fund at the same time as we've had to manage disbursements. And that's been challenging in terms of ensuring that all our systems and processes and procedures are in place at the same time as we're ensuring funding is getting out the door. The Medical Research Future Fund Act requires that we have some overarching documents which are actually tabled as instruments. The first is a 5-year strategy and the second is a 2-yearly priorities document. So the minister's required to have regard to the priorities when he's allocating funds through the Medical Research Future Fund. Both documents are established by AMRAB, and AMRAB's required to have a national consultation before tabling and finalising the documents. You'll all be aware that the terms of the first AMRAB board expired in late February, and we're working with government to establish a second board. And just also to let people know that we are conscious that the first 5-year strategy is due to expire at the end of this year, and we are actually required by legislation to table the second strategy by early November. And we're also reviewing and looking at the priorities because there's a requirement within the legislation for those two documents to be in alignment and to be complementary. So in addition to the legislative framework that we operate under in terms of the strategies and the priorities, government announced a 10-year investment plan for the Medical Research Future Fund, which was a $5 billion allocation in 4 themes. And those 4 themes articulate into 20 initiatives right across the spectrum of health and medical research, from basic science all the way through to translation. This is the program structure that we operate under within the MRFF, and it's I think it's useful for people to understand how all those things link together. So we have the fund as the overarching investment. We have 4 themes, 20 initiatives. Each of the grant opportunities has to relate to an initiative. That's how they kind of operate. And each grant opportunity, the frame and the objectives of that grant opportunity has to align with the initiative within which it sits. So, for example, we have a primary healthcare initiative, and that the grant opportunities that operate under the primary healthcare initiative have to focus on primary healthcare. We have a medical research commercialisation activity, and all of the opportunities that exist under it have to focus on commercialising products. And then the grant agreements then sit underneath the grant opportunities. And from each grant opportunity, you can have one or multiple grant agreements. As Sally flagged, we worked really hard to try and establish a monitoring, evaluation and learning strategy for the MRFF. As you're all, I'm sure, really aware, assessing impact from health and medical research is a really challenging area, and having looked at what was being done internationally, we've kind of tried to come up with a bit of a hybrid model that allows us to consider the complexity of the Medical Research Future Fund, but also really focus on the outcomes that are trying to be achieved and how we assess those. So you'll see, this is the conceptual framework from the monitoring, evaluation and learning strategy. What you'll see is that the vision and the aims and those 5 impact measures, which are better health outcomes, economic growth, beneficial change to health practice, increased health efficiency and increased job and export potential. All those items are actually from the first 5-year Australian Medical Research and Innovation strategy. And so that's that connection to the overarching framework that's been set by the board for the purpose and the implementation of the MRFF. So what we try to do is take those measures as set out in the strategy and identify what would be measurable actions or measurable items that would then be able to use to assess the effectiveness of each levels of the MRFF. So starting with grant opportunities, grant agreements, grant opportunities, initiatives and themes. And we came up with those 8 items that you can see there that are the measures of success. And each of the kind of levels of the MRFF will be assessed against these measures of success. Now, we don't expect every grant agreement or every grant opportunity to contribute to every measure of success. That's something that will be taken on a case-by-case basis. So you may have seen in our most recent grant opportunities, we're actually asking applicants to state or to indicate how their project will contribute to these 8 measures of success and to set themselves a bit of a target. And that statement against the measures of success is being used to as part of the assessment process for each grant, and then will feed into it'll be a requirement for those successful grants to report each year on how they're going or have progress made against the measures of success. Just to let you know that we've actually completed 2 evaluations at the initiative level. They were for the Medical Research Commercialisation Initiative and for the Rapid Applied Research Translation Initiative. So those 2 reports from those 2 evaluations are available on the MRFF website. We've got approval from the Minister for 2 evaluations, which are both currently in train, one on the Clinical Trials Activity Initiative and one on the Million Minds Mental Health Mission. So both of those initiatives have actually been in place for a number of years, and we felt it was timely to evaluate progress that's been made in those initiatives. So I just thought I'd spend a couple of slides just teasing out the difference and how we think about the MRFF and how it's different, which hopefully will help you kind of get the context of how to interact with the MRFF, which is sort of one thing that Sally really wanted me to talk about today. So I guess in my mind, these are the key areas that where the MRFF is different from other funding mechanisms. So we do focus on an area of unmet need or a technology with transformational potential. We bring together researchers, health professionals, consumers, stakeholders, industry partners, basically anybody that has a stake in the outcome to be involved in the research program. So we're outcome focused. We do try to harness resources across the system, and that's working like supporting and encouraging partnerships and collaborative investment, etc. And we are looking at new research approaches. We've had feedback around some of the challenges researchers have had in implementing their research and their ideas, and we've been trying to develop new grant models that address some of those challenges that have been identified. So a key thing about the MRFF is that we're able to respond to emerging issues. So you'll have all seen that through the coronavirus research response. We've had a number of grant opportunities looking to address key areas of gaps in knowledge and understanding for coronavirus. There is actually a current grant opportunity that is open, which is focused on research that will help improve understanding of the long-term health impacts of coronavirus, and a couple of streams that look at vaccination schedules using either alternative vaccines or addressing or looking at populations that wouldn't normally be researched by pharmaceutical companies. So those, for example, that are immunocompromised. We had our bushfire impact grant opportunity with 2 streams last year, one looking at the physiological impacts of bushfires and the other looking at the mental health impacts. And another example is we've had a silicosis research grant opportunity, and that was to respond to questions that were identified by a dust diseases task force, and that was in response to concerns being raised about silicosis that's used in employment conditions and the impact that's having on long-term health, particularly for people who cut stone. We do focus on filling areas of unmet need. So here are some recent grant opportunities or initiatives that really address different types of unmet need. So the efficient use of existing medicines was in response to a request from the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee, and that was looking at how we can more effectively use medicines that are in practice or use them more efficiently, compared with always having new drugs come onto the system. We've had a grant opportunity on low survival cancers. So this has identified a group of cancers with really low relative survival rates compared with others, and where there'd been limited improvement in relative survival rates over time, and identified that diagnosis was a significant issue. And so we've done a grant opportunity to try and drive research in that area. Indigenous health is obviously a really high needs area in Australia and in other countries, and the key, I guess, reform in that area is it's actually Indigenous-led research through the establishment of an expert advisory panel who've been really incredibly supportive and done a really amazing job to help us reform the way that we call for research, that we are prioritising research that is led by Aboriginal people and that focuses on the needs of the communities. And just another example with our brain cancer survivorship grant opportunities. So the experience of survivors was a need that was identified by consumers, and they wanted us to focus on the sorts of issues that impact their quality of life post-cancer. And so we've had a couple of grant opportunities that have focused specifically on experiences of survivors. We're also trying to do things a little bit differently. A key kind of focus that I've had at the request of the Minister is to really try and embed international views in how we do our business. So you'll have seen that we had international reviews of the mission roadmaps and implementation plans. We've also had a really active focus on having international reviewers on all of our grant assessment committees. And so we've had quite good success with that. It is quite challenging at times to kind of engage people from other countries. But what we found through both grant assessment committees and also through the mission roadmaps and implementation plans is that people have been incredibly generous with their time and have been quite interested in how we're doing the research differently in Australia and kind of interested to find out what we're doing and how we're doing it. So we've had some good success there. But no, it's an area that we'll keep continuing focus on. We've had a look at evaluation and how to measure impact. And as I kind of indicated earlier, it's quite a challenging area that we've been focused on and trying new approaches and different ways of actually kind of measuring impact, and that embedding of the measures and of success and impact within the grant agreement and the selection process is one of the ways that we tried to take a different approach for assessing the impact of research. We've been looking at how we can support early to mid-career researchers. We've had some changes in our capacity, capability and resources selection criteria that we used to have a line that involved the top 5 most recent publications to be an accessible component of that. Now we've taken that out and really focused on the capacity and the capability of the team as they're able to articulate. We've got quite a strong consultation approach in addition to the work that's led through AMRAB and through the strategies and priorities. We've had consultations on the MRFF missions. We've also had a series of roundtables with interested parties. I've listed 3 there: medicinal cannabis, ovarian cancer, and we've also just had one recently on early to mid-career researchers. And we do try to engage with peaks on our policies and processes, and I've identified a few where we've actually gone out in a structured way and sought advice from groups like the Group of 8, the Innovative Research Universities and AMRI, etc., to ask for advice or for feedback on how our grant policies and processes are actually working in practice, and if we've had any unintended consequences that we need to know about. So we're also trying new approaches for grant funding. As I flagged, we're trying new grant models, so people will be aware of frontiers. In late 2020, we've, in our most recent grant opportunities, we've implemented a grant model called an incubator. Now that's short-term funding, sort of 12 to 24 months, up to about $1 million, to provide sort of groups of researchers an opportunity to try new methods, new approaches. So it's almost like seed funding, to take a good idea and progress it, to then make it able to be competitive for other funding sources, for example, NHMRC or an MRFF, a broader MRFF grant. We'll also be looking to implement, so these are all ministerially approved, what we'll call an Accelerator Grant, and that grant is really, will be large scale funding, and that will be to take an intractable area and implement what's known to actually generate measurable changes in that area. And so what we've heard is that researchers struggle to get sufficiently large funding buckets with which to implement kind of a big research program to make transformative change. And so the Accelerator Grant aims to address that gap. If you look at our grant guidelines, we've kind of got structured selection criteria, and they're all focused on outcomes. And so we're interested in the impact of the program, the methodology, capacity, capability, and resources, but also the overall value and risk of that program and the benefit that it will generate, like how it aligns with the overarching goals of the MRFF, the initiative, and that particular grant opportunity. We're trying new approaches for funding that are focused on improving care and outcomes. And so, for example, with our Clinician Researchers Initiative, we moved away from investigator grant models to funding groups of clinicians to address problems that have arisen in their day-to-day practice. And with rapid applied research translation, again, we've shifted to a model that's really looking at supporting researchers and to change and transform care, and to provide sort of significant amounts of funding to support that transformation. We've also got different grant assessment committee structures. And so in all of our grant assessment committees, we have consumers. We also have people who are involved in service delivery, either as a manager of service delivery or as a clinician, someone actually implementing care. And as I flagged earlier, we try to have international people on all of the MRFF grant assessment committees. Sally asked me to just have a look at funding for rural, regional and remote. And so I've just got some stats on there, just advising that we've funded 22 grants as at 31st of May to the value of 193 million for research that's focused on rural, regional and remote health. And in terms of Indigenous health, since inception, 31 projects have been funded to a value of $86.6 million. And that's across 9 initiatives. It's not just in a single initiative. We've been funding Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health projects throughout the MRFF. Just some information about the fund specifically, again, just that it's Indigenous health, Indigenous-led, and really addressing issues that are of importance to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and communities. And there's 160 million that's been allocated through that fund. There was a question about big data, which is a slightly harder kind of set of grants to pull out. I guess I just wanted to flag that projects that use big data are embedded across a range of initiatives and missions. A couple just to bring to your attention that have already happened was through our National Critical Research Infrastructure Initiative, where we funded a grant opportunity that focused on applied artificial intelligence in health. And that was, we funded 5 projects through that grant opportunity to a value of 19 million. And also the Primary Healthcare Research Data Infrastructure Grant opportunity, which was run through our Research Data Infrastructure Initiative. And that's currently under assessment. In that most recent grant opportunity, $10 million was made available. There are also, if you look at some of our implementation plans for the missions, there's a couple that clearly will require big data approaches, particularly genomics and cardiovascular health mission. And then looking more broadly across the all of the Medical Research Future Fund. The Frontiers initiative is another one where big data approaches will be actually quite critical. I guess this is just advice I try to give all potential applicants when thinking about the MRFF. So we run probably 40 to 50 grant opportunities each year. And unlike other funding bodies, every grant opportunity is different. And so we really encourage people to look beyond the title and the name of the initiative and have a look at the objectives and outcomes. So section 1.3, look at the eligibility criteria and also the selection criteria. All of the grant opportunity has to align with the medical research and innovation priorities that are in force, and you'll see we've incorporated a statement for each grant opportunity based on feedback from the sector to explain how the grant opportunity aligns with the priorities that are in force. The grant opportunities all must align with the initiative that the grant opportunity is run from, as I flagged earlier, the example of primary healthcare. And just as I flagged also earlier, that we do require researchers to outline or identify how they'll contribute to the overall measures of success, so their contribution to the MRFF more broadly. I just have got a couple of slides, and you can see there's quite a few grant opportunities that are all quite recent. Just a couple of slides that I thought I would bring to your attention because they are areas that could have been potential for applications from your members. And so right from the sort of translation activities to clinician researchers, some of the clinical trials, which obviously require multidisciplinary teams to implement effectively, primary healthcare and also the data grant opportunity, mental health, some preventive and public health, and a couple of other sort of initiatives based in the mission. So I guess this is just to give you a sense of the extent or the kind of range of grant opportunities that have been run recently that could have been of interest, or where you may have been able to put in applications. And just to sort of say that we feel like we're constantly having feedback, and we are listening and we are learning and we are trying to adapt our processes. As I flagged earlier, we're only 5 years in, and so we're constantly trying to, I guess, refine our processes and find the best ways to do the business. So we do engage carefully with the AMRAB consultation processes and make sure that we're learning and hearing about the elements that relate to program delivery. We do have structured and unstructured processes for receiving feedback from the sector. So, for example, it was about September last year, we consulted with the main groups around how our guidelines were working, if there were changes that might need to be made, how they were being interpreted, if we had any unintended consequences from basically the guidelines as they were structured. We do a bit of horizon scanning, and so in terms of thinking about gaps, we are quite conscious that there are areas where there's a lot of interest and a lot of capacity when we do grant opportunities. So, and also areas where there aren't existing funding bodies that actually offer funding opportunities. And so a couple of examples include artificial intelligence in health particularly, and also infrastructure funding. And we're always scanning the environment to see emerging issues and unmet needs, and the obvious kind of examples of that are the coronavirus research response and also the bushfire impact grant opportunity. These are ways that you can keep connected with us and to kind of know the things that are happening in the sectors or in the MRFF. So we have our website, we have a monthly newsletter where we transmit all of the sort of things that have been happening in the MRFF. We encourage everyone to join a grant assessment committee, and you can nominate for joining a grant assessment committee through the website that I articulated there. It's sort of managed by NHMRC. However, we also use it for grant assessment committees through Business Grants Hub as well. Look out for mission roadmaps and implementation plans. We consulted on 6 over the last few months, and we're looking to finalise those shortly. and also register for Grant Connect for, just so you're aware of grant opportunities that are opening. So there was a question about making administrative data available for research, and some of you may know this already, but just to highlight that there are 3 structured mechanisms through which to access data, administrative data. Services Australia is one, and that's access to unlinked data. The AIHW provides access to linked data, and the Australian Bureau of Statistics provides access to data that's linked not only within the health sector, but also more broadly across government services like the census and education. Within the department, there's been efforts to expand the data that's available to researchers. So for example, there's work to incorporate the Australian Immunisation Register to make it available, and also the National Diabetes Services Scheme and the National Cancer Screening Register. And also the department more broadly is working with a range of partners to try and to find ways to kind of make data available and more easily. And there was a question about the My Health record and access to it. And so there was a framework that was released in May 2018, and it articulates the principles around decision-making for access to data through My Health record. So the Australian government is working to implement the framework, including some investments to generate the infrastructure that's required over this year and next year. And I guess we've just been asked to advise that the de-identified data won't be available until the necessary, I guess, governance and security frameworks are in place to ensure, I guess, people's legislative requirements are met and the privacy and other requirements are met.